Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivadachari Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivadachari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Janna Vallabha Girivadachari Gopi Janna Vallabha Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivadachari Yashoda Nandana Braja Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Padivara Jakacharya Ashtottara Satashi Srimad His Divine Grace of High Charana Ravinda Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Vandacharya save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivara Jakacharya Ashtottara Satashi Srimad His Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Namacharya Shri Das Thakur Ki Prem se Kapal Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Sri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shri Vrindavana Ki Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Purushtam Chatra Jagatpuri Dham Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samavekta Bhaktivinoda Ki Sri Sri Radha Govardhana Dari Ki Sri Sri Krishna Balarama Ki Patita Pavana Sri Gora Hari Ki Jai Nitai Go Premanandi. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious to some glories. Oh, glorious, Lord, be to Sri Guru and Sri Garanga. Oh, glorious to Srila Prabhupada Ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from second canto, chapter 8, text number 19 and 20, because 19 doesn't have a purport. Although there is a lot of information in text 19, but anyhow. Actually, we know that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he gave class on one verse for 3 months. You know, so you can see that in each one of these verses there's just so much information. Just depends on one's understanding, I guess. Tatvanam Parisankyanam Tatvanam Parisankyanam Tatvanam Parisankyanam Lakshanam Hetu Lakshanam Lakshanam Hetu Lakshanam Lakshanam Hetu Lakshanam Tatvanam Parisankyanam Lakshanam Hetu Lakshanam Purusharadhana Vidhi Purusharadhana Vidhi Purusharadhana Vidhi Yogasya Atyatmikasya. I was practicing that word at home because it's a really difficult word. Cha sorry, I didn't practice enough, obviously. Yogasyadhyatmikasya cha Yogasyadhyatmikasya cha Purusharadhana Vidhi Yogasyadhyatmikasya cha Tatvanam, of the elements that constitute the creation. Parisankyanam, of the number of such elements. Lakshanam, symptoms. Hetu Lakshanam, the symptoms of the causes. Purusha, of the Lord. Aradhana, of devotional service. Vidhi, rules and regulations. Yogasya, of cultivation of the yoga system. Adhyatmikasya, spiritual methods leading to devotional service. Cha, also. Okay, so translation. Kindly explain all about the elementary principles of creation, the number of such elementary principles, their causes and their development, and also the process of devotional service and the method of mystic powers. Responsively. Kindly explain all about the elementary principles of creation. The number of such elementary principles, their causes and their development, and also the process of devotional service and the method of mystic powers. So I'll read text 20 as well, because this one doesn't. Is that what you do? Is if there's no purport? Yogeshvarashvaryagati linga bangastu yoginam vedopaveda dharmanam itihasa puranayo. What are the opulences of the great mystics, and what is their ultimate realization? How does the perfect mystic become detached from the subtle astral body? What is the basic knowledge of the Vedic literatures, including the branches of history and the supplementary Puranas? So we see here, this section here, basically from verse 7 through to verse 23 in this chapter, which constitutes most of this chapter, is King Parikshit asking questions to Shukadeva Goswami. And all up he asks him 21 questions in this section. I'll get into that a little bit more later, but there's quite a few interesting questions. And in these two verses he's asking him, I think five different questions. So the purport. The Yogeshvara, or the master of mystic powers, can exhibit 8 kinds of wonders of perfection by becoming smaller than the atom or lighter than a feather, getting anything and everything he desires, and going anywhere and everywhere he likes, creating even a planet in the sky, etc. There are many Yogeshwaras having different proficiencies in these wonderful powers, and the topmost of them all is Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is the greatest yogi, and he can perform such wonderful things far beyond the ordinary living beings. And of course we know in the Bhagavad Gita, does anyone know that verse which mentions that Krishna is the master of all such Yogeshwaras? Anyone know that verse? Last verse of the Gita. Yatya Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatya Pratana. Yeah, the Krishna, he's the master of all mystics. So even above Lord Shiva, even though Prabhupada is saying here that Lord Shiva is the greatest of all mystics, and above him also is Lord Krishna, because he's the master of all such mystics. The devotees of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, do not directly practice the process of mystic powers, but by the grace of the Lord, his devotee can defeat even a great Yogeshvara like Durvasa Muni, who picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish and wanted to show the wonderful achievements of his mystic powers. He wanted to show Maharaj Ambarish how powerful he was. Maharaj Ambarish was a pure devotee of the Lord, and thus without any efforts on his part, the Lord saved him from the wrath of Yogeshvara Durvasa Muni. And the latter was obliged to beg pardon from the king. Similarly, at the time of Draupadi's precarious position, when she was attacked by the Kurus, who wanted to see her naked in the open assembly of the royal order, the Lord saved her from being stripped by supplying an unlimited length of sari to cover her. And Draupadi knew nothing about mystic powers. Therefore, the devotees are also Yogeshwaras by the unlimited power of the Lord, just as a child is powerful by the strength of the parents. They do not try to protect themselves by any artificial means, but are saved by the mercy of the parents. And it's like, I'm sure we all have an experience of this sort of thing where, you know, by the protection of someone more powerful than us, we also become powerful. I remember when I was at high school, I don't know what high schools are like now, but the high school I went to was very kind of, shall we say, competitive. Not in the academic sense. It was like, you know, everyone was, you know, all these guys were trying, the tough guys were trying to lord it over the not so tough guys. I wasn't one of the tough guys, I was one of the wimps. And so that we had a few, there was one guy, you know, I won't mention all the names, but there's quite a few guys. It was in a housing commission area, so there's a lot of, you know, economically disadvantaged people living there. So, as we know, you know, that when people don't have money, it tends to bring out bad qualities because they're stealing or whatever to try to get money. And so this school was a particularly tough school. And I remember there was a few in particular who used to like lording it over everyone in the school. And they would do it by violence. That was their means. If you didn't submit to their thing, they'd beat you up. You know, as simple as that. And it wasn't just like fights. There was knife fights and all sorts of stuff. You know, it was like I managed to stay out of the way though, because my brother's best friend was the toughest guy in the school. So he liked me, so he protected me. So no one would go near me. You know, so you know, I'm sure we all have experiences like that with our parents. The same thing. It is like, you know. So, sometimes you see the children, they'll be taunting another child, you know, and when the child goes to respond, they run behind their parents. So they feel protected. Or there's a really good example. Actually, you can see in nature, you know, like sometimes you go down to the beach, and you'll see the crabs, they take shelter of the water. And the water is so powerful, but if we take shelter of the water in the same way, we can wind up in trouble. I remember years ago visiting Niagara Falls, and there's these boats you can get into, and they'll take you right up, not too close, because you know if you get too close to the falls, you just get completely smashed, you know, down the bottom. And I was marveling at how, you know, like we couldn't get too close because we get completely destroyed. Yet there's these tiny little birds, about this big, right where the water is going, you know, where the falls are actually crashing into the water, they're diving in there and catching fish and things like that. Completely fearless. But, you know, no way I'd get that close to the water, because, you know, to the falls, because I know we'd be destroyed. You know, so when you take shelter of something more superior, you have the benefit of that power, and that's one of the points that's being made here. Is you know, for us as devotees, if we take shelter of Krishna, then we can become completely protected by Krishna, and we need not fear him. And we need not fear the material nature. And there's that nice verse in the 7th chapter of the Gita where Krishna explains to Arjuna. He says, "Dayevesh gunamai mamaya duratya mamaya vijay prapadyante mayam metam tarantade." This divine energy of mine, consisting of 3 modes of material nature, is very difficult to overcome. It's actually, I mean, Krishna doesn't say it, but it's practically impossible. I mean, you know, where is that person in this material world who's overcome the modes of nature without taking shelter of Krishna? That person doesn't exist. Because if they don't take shelter of Krishna, they succumb to the modes of nature. They have to, because the modes of nature are so powerful. Because as Krishna says, David is his divine energy. It's not some mundane thing. It's Krishna's divine energy. So very, very powerful, and empowered by Krishna to, you know, overpower all those living entities who don't take shelter of him. That's the purpose of the material nature, is to keep us away from Krishna, because we're not really interested in Krishna. Just like you see, you know, with you know, prime ministers and kings and things like that, they have their secretaries who keep away people who don't really have the qualification to come and see them. You can't just go and knock on Scott Morrison's door and have a talk with him. You know, it just doesn't work like that. You have to go through all the appropriate channels, and they'll want to know what you want to talk about, and they'll do a police check and a background check, etc., etc., etc. And you know, 5 years later, when he's no longer in power, you might get a chance to speak to him. You know, so you know, there's all these systems there. So the point we're seeing here, how when these great personalities, when they take shelter of Krishna, then he protects them fully. Completely protected. And we see, especially in the case of Draupadi, you know, she was trying by her own power, and you know, she's a Kshatriya woman, so she's obviously very, very powerful. But nonetheless, you know, you know, who was it? It was Dushashan and Karna. You know, very, very big, powerful Kshatriyas. Karna was such a powerful warrior, and Dushashan so powerful. And even though she herself was very powerful, she had no capacity to resist them trying to disrobe her. And you know, she was calling out to Krishna, but you know, half-heartedly calling out to Krishna. When it got to the point where she just, completely surrendered to Krishna, hey Govinda, hey Gopal, threw her arms up in the air, let go. Then Krishna protected her fully. You know. And that's the situation for all of us. So I was listening to an interesting class yesterday on verse 19 and 20 from Sankarshan Prabhu. And he was making the point, which I found really interesting, is that Because we often have this reflection of how, if this happens, that happens, then I'll surrender to Krishna or whatever. We're always looking for these things to happen. But the mercy of the Lord is already there for us to take. It's right there waiting for us. We just have to accept it. We just have to take it. We just have to surrender to Krishna. That's all it takes. It's not like we have to go somewhere else. And there's a nice verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita which says, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Sadakavanai Shavanati Sutachita Karayodai. That this Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem, this perfection, this eternal perfection of Krishna, of love of Godhead, it's you don't get it from somewhere else. It's already there in the heart. It just needs to be awoken. So everything we need for love of Godhead, it's already there. We have it right within our reach. We just have to awaken it. And as we know, the process for awakening is to hear and chant the glories of the Lord. There's just a little bit at the end I wanted to read on the purport, and then I'll get into what I wanted to discuss. Maharaj Parikshit inquired from the learned Brahmana Shukadeva Goswami about the ultimate destination of such great mystics, or how they attain such extraordinary powers by their own efforts or by the grace of the Lord. He inquired also about their detachment from subtle and gross material bodies. He inquired also about the purports of all Vedic knowledge. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole purport of all the Vedas is to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus become a transcendental loving servant of the Lord. So this is a really interesting section, because what's happening here is Parikshit Maharaj is asking all the questions that are going to be explained over the next 10 cantos. This is basically setting us up for the rest of the Bhagavatam. And we see that in the first canto, it's all about setting the scene to get to the point of Parikshit Maharaj being cursed and then Shukadeva Goswami appearing. Shukadeva Goswami appears in the 19th chapter, right towards the end of the 19th chapter. There's 19 chapters in the first canto, and there's 10 chapters in this canto. So we see round about verse 28, I think it is. I think it's 28. Because what's happened is Parikshit's being cursed by this young Brahmin boy, and so he decided, okay, I'm going to give up everything. I'm just going to go sit by the bank of the Jamuna, the Ganga. It's actually the Jamuna. It says Ganga, but it's, according to Prabhupada and our acharyas, it's the Jamuna. And fast till I die, because I want to go back to Godhead. I don't want to waste my time in this material world. I can see it's a waste of time. The only solution for me is to go back to the spiritual world. So he goes there, and it's kind of interesting, because what happens is that all the great personalities, because Parikshit Maharaj is not an ordinary king. He's the head of the Pandu dynasty, the head of the Kauravas, so it's understood he's a great personality. He's a great devotee of Krishna, a Mahabhagavat devotee of Krishna. So when the sages heard that he was going to go, because news travels fast throughout the universe, faster than the internet, they knew instantly that he was going to go there. No one had to type a message and send out an email or anything, or a text on WhatsApp or something. So they knew that Parikshit Maharaj was going to go there and fast till death. So they all assembled, all the great personalities. And you even see Narada Muni was there, Vyasadeva was there, Asita, Devala. All these great personalities had come there because they knew that something was going to happen. They knew that something significant was going to happen, because he's such a great devotee. And then so he was asking them various questions. And then in verse 28 he says, what is the duty of one who's about to die? And it's described by different acharyas that various sages were offering, karma kanda, gnana kanda type of answers, but it wasn't satisfying to him. So we see a few verses later, Shukadeva Goswami appears on the scene. And Shukadeva Goswami, he had no clothes on. He was just, and he was being followed by these children and women, and they were just making fun of him because they thought he was a crazy person. But the persons there, the great sages and Parikshit Maharaj himself, they understood the science of physiognomy. Physiognomy means you can look at a person's face and his bodily features, you can understand where they are spiritually. So they could understand that actually he was the topmost devotee. And when they all stood up to offer respect to Shukadeva Goswami, then all the children and the women who were following him and harassing him just sort of, uh-oh, we're in the wrong place, we better get out of here. So they kind of disappeared. And then so they offered him the seat of respect. And we see there's a few verses where Parikshit Maharaj is offering respect to Shukadeva Goswami because he understands who he is. And then he asks him the same question in verse 34. He says, what is the duty of one who's about to die? What should he hear? What should he speak? What should he do? And then, so that basically concludes the first canto. So it's quite a significant, it's quite a momentous thing. It's like the conclusion of the first canto is that he's asking, what is the prime thing that one should know? And then I just like to, if I can find them quickly, just read the first 6 verses. I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read the 6 verses. These are really, if the thing's going to work. These are really, really significant verses, and you've probably all heard them, these verses, because they're often quoted by Srila Prabhupada. And the first chapter of the second canto is called the first step in God realization. Sukadeva, so there's an invocation on the Lord Bhagavatam Vasudeva, and then he says, Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, my dear King, your question is glorious because it's beneficial to all kinds of people. Varyan Ishite Prashna, very, very powerful. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing and is approved by all transcendentalists. Those persons who are materially engrossed, so he starts off glorifying him, then he says the people who are materially engrossed are in a bad situation, then he explains what the ultimate goal is. Those persons who are materially engrossed, being blind to the knowledge of ultimate truth, have many matters for hearing in human society, O Emperor. The lifetime of such envious householders is passed at night either in sleeping or in sex indulgence, and in the daytime either in making money or maintaining family members. Do not inquire into the problems of life, being too attached to the fallible soldiers like body, children and wife. Though sufficiently experienced, they still do not see their inevitable destruction. And then he goes, in the next verse is Tasmat Bharata Savatma Bhagavan Ishvaro Hari Shrotavya Kititavjacha Smatavya Chetitabhayam. That he says Tasmat Bharata, he says therefore. And Prabhupada, whenever this word therefore comes up, Prabhupada explains this is very significant. He's saying therefore, this is like, you have to do this. Because he's talking about all the negativity, this is what happens to people who are not serious about Krishna consciousness, who don't understand the nature of the self, devoid of Atma Tattva. Therefore, one who's serious is Tasmat Bharata Savatma, one who actually is serious to understand the truth. Bhagavan, and this is really important also, he says Bhagavan Ishvaro Hari, just so there's no ambiguity of who he's talking about. He identifies the Supreme Personality of Godhead in 3 ways. Bhagavan, who's the possessor of all opulences, Ishvara, who's the supreme controller, and Hari, the one who delivers from suffering, distress. So 3 times he's identifying who he's talking about. He says, and he says, for one who's serious, who wants to overcome this fear of death, they must hear about, remember, glorify, and chant the glories of the Lord. And that sets the scene for the whole Bhagavatam. That's what the whole Bhagavatam is about. Hearing and chanting about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, understand the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then we see in the next 3 chapters, so that the first chapter of the second canto and the subsequent 2 chapters, he's answering that question to some extent. And then we see again in the 4th chapter, he again starts to ask questions. He asks him 6 very powerful questions. Let me see if I can find them. Okay, so he asks him, how does the Lord create this universe through his energies? then he says, how does he enact primary creation through his Maya Shakti? How does he carry out the secondary creation? So he's asking about Shaga and Vishaga, how the Lord creates, but also how the Lord's energies create. Like Brahma, etc. How do they, and the different Prajapatis, how do they create? Yeah? And how does the Supreme Lord act alone? How does the Supreme Lord act? Alone with the modes of nature? Does he simultaneously expand in many forms? Does he consecutively expand? Or is it how does it go on? And then we see what happens is from there, Sukadeva Goswami, it's not like, it kind of reminds me of the pastime of when that when just trying to remember the exact detail of it. When what's his name, Dasara, when he was getting Sita married, then they had this mighty bow. It was actually the bow of Lord Shiva, and so they announced that they were going to do Sita's Swayamvar, and so many heroes came to try to. Because the deal was you had to pick up, string the bow and shoot at the target. That was, that was proving that you were, and hit the target, of course, get the bullseye. That would prove that you were the right person to marry Sita. So many persons came, they tried to just pick up the bow and just shoot straight away. They couldn't even pick the bow up, it was such a mighty bow. And then Lord Ram came. He offers respect to the bow, he offers his prayers, a respectful mood. He picked the bow up, strung the bow, pulled the thing and broke the bow. So they can understand, okay, he's strong enough. So in the same way we see that what happened was Shukadeva Goswami, when he was asked these questions, immediately he starts to offer prayers to the Supreme Person of Godhead. He's asking for the mercy, he's asking for that he can speak the truth. And then what he did, rather than just trying to present himself as being the knowledgeable person, I know everything, so I'm going to give you the right answer. No, what did he do? He quoted an exchange between Narada and Brahma, answering basically the same questions. So we see this is a very important story, or a very important lesson for us, is rather than whenever we're engaged in dialogue or giving, speaking Bhagavatam class and things like that, rather than presenting, I know this, I know that, what we do, and this is what Prabhupada's instruction to the devotees was, is that we should understand, Prabhupada mentioned, we should understand these books just like a lawyer knows the law books. And we see when a lawyer, gets in, is presenting a case in court, they'll be quoting so many precedents. You should know this, right? In this court case this happened, in this court case that happened, and the ruling was this. So rather than saying, well, because of my arguments, no, but previously this was argued in this case and that case, and therefore you should draw the same conclusion. So the same for us. Prabhupada wanted us to know these books so well that whenever a question comes up, we can say, well, actually in the Bhagavatam or in the Bhagavad Gita, it says this, this, and this, and this. Therefore, we understand this is the proper way to act. Rather than just trying to argue the point based on some mundane logic or some personal experience. It's also good to include personal experience, because then that helps to make it real for people. Or when like I was talking before about when I was at high school. Because we've all had that kind of experience, so it makes it very real for you. But we also need to connect it to the lessons that are in the scriptures. And that's what we see that Shukadeva Goswami is doing, is rather than quoting his own knowledge or whatever, he's saying Lord Brahma answered these same questions to Narada Muni, and so he spends the whole chapter doing that, and then we see that goes through to excuse me, through to chapter 7. And because he's asking about incarnations, all that sort of. So in chapter 7, the different schedule, I think there's 25 scheduled incarnations are mentioned there. And then again we find this chapter. So he's satisfied with those answers, and then so again he's coming up with 21 questions, all types of things. And we see that what will happen is that. And actually, it's interesting because then at the end of that chapter 7, Brahma summarizes the whole thing, the whole 3 chapters that he's just answered to Narada Muni in 4 verses. So it's very, obviously a very, very powerful intellect where he can sum up this whole instruction in such a short way, like a brief way. And we'll see also, if we go next chapter, we find is a very, very important chapter because it has the chapter shloki of the Bhagavatam, the 4 key slokas of the Bhagavatam, which is what the Lord spoke to Brahma originally. And from those 4 verses, he understood the whole science of Krishna consciousness. So we can see the nature of Brahma's intellect, very, very powerful. Yeah. And so now we find that Parikshit Maharaj, he's asking some more questions. And as I mentioned, 21 questions there. And we'll see that over the course of the Bhagavatam, and I think it's Jiva Goswami mentions that these questions aren't answered chronologically. He answers them all, but they're scattered throughout the Bhagavatam. And so you'll see that. And then also we see that part of his question is because at the end of the 7th chapter, we see that Brahma has asked Narada Muni, expand on this science according to your realization. So then Parikshit wants to know, well, how did he do that? He wants to know about Narada Muni and how he explained this science. And we see that with I've mentioned this several times because, there's many extraordinary characters, many personalities I personally find quite inspirational in the Bhagavatam. One is Shukadeva Goswami. If you read about him, he's just, quite an amazing personality. He's just, completely free from all material desires. He has no his only interest actually is to expand the Bhagavatam. And he experiences great bliss. And we find that as the Bhagavatam is going on, Parikshit Maharaj is asking him more and more questions, and he's becoming more and more enlivened to speak more and more about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it mentions in the Nectar of Devotion, Rupa Goswami explains that he achieved perfection through explaining the Bhagavatam. So he's already a perfected soul, but his perfection became more aware or more revealed to us through his expanding the Bhagavatam. And then so we see how Parikshit, he's asking more questions and explaining more and more. And the other personality I find particularly inspirational in the Bhagavatam, there's many personalities, but particularly inspirational is Narada Muni. And we see that Narada Muni, I think the only canto he's not quite prominent in is the 12th canto. And if we go back, I can't remember if it's it might be the 5th or the 6th chapter of the 1st canto. Srila Prabhupada, he's offering respects to Narada Muni. He says, we're very grateful to Narada Muni for appearing in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we see that Narada Prabhupada also found him very, very inspirational. And so like in these 2 verses, there's actually 4 questions. We see how he's asked him to describe the elements. He's saying here, the elementary principles of creation, the number of the elementary principles, their causes, their development. So he wants to know all about the material nature. And this is excuse me, this is not, like he's just trying to find out some mundane knowledge, because if we look back, I think it might be verse 3 or 4, somewhere like that. I can't remember what it was. But earlier on in this chapter, verse 3, please continue narrating Srimad Bhagavatam so that I can place my mind upon the Supreme Soul, Lord Krishna, and being completely free from all material qualities, thus relinquish this body. So that's his intention. This is like a sankalpa. He's stating what his intention is, that I'm not interested in material nature. I don't want to get caught up in this stuff. I just want to relinquish my body, being free from all material desires and fixing my mind upon Krishna. That's what I want to do. But we see how our acharyas, they explain that the reason he was asking all these questions is actually out of compassion. He's asking Sukadeva Goswami to explain the whole material situation and how the whole creation has come about, etc., so that the conditioned living entities can understand the position of Krishna. They can understand how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how everything's come from him, everything's appeared by his arrangement. And also as we see, it's described that at the end of the 10th chapter of the Gita, where Krishna explains, he says, Yad Yad Vibhutimat Sattvam Srimad Urjatam Eva, that you should know that all glorious and wonderful creations, they spring from but a spark of my splendor. It's just like you take one spark out of a big forest fire. Just like a few years ago, I think it was last year or the year before, there was these massive bushfires down in Sydney. I remember flying into Sydney when I came back from India. I was flying into Sydney, and it's the only time I've flown over bushfires plenty of times. It was the only time you could actually see the fire from 20 whatever thousand feet the planes are up. You could actually see it. It was like massive. So you can imagine taking one spark out of that fire. How much energy is it in comparison to the whole fire? It's nothing. So Krishna is saying that you should know that all this glorious and wonderful creation in this material world springs from but a tiny spark of my splendor. That's all it is that. And we're so enamored, we're so in awe of this creation. And it is pretty impressive. Like, I remember years ago being down at, I think it was Port Fairy in Victoria, and there was these like massive waves rolling, and they're like 40, 50 foot tall at least. Massive waves rolling, and it was just reflecting, watching those waves, how this is just a spark of Krishna's splendor, this whole creation. So we see so many powerful things in this material world, but it's nothing. Like sometimes you have these hailstorms, and fortunately we don't get them here, but sometimes you see hailstorms the size of baseballs, and they just smash everything. Or windstorms, they just rip trees out. We see floods here all the time. Like several times a year we get floods, and you'll see like trees floating down the river. Like even, I can't remember what year it was, but you might remember, KK. If you go down to the road at the front here, to Elgin Road, and you turn left, you go over the bridge just up here, near Ewing. What's that road up there? Everett's Road. Everett's Road, yeah, the bridge just near Everett's Road. Right, that bridge was washed out a few years ago, well, quite a few years, about 20 years ago now. It was washed out. Such a big, arrangement by our material engineers to get across the river, but then a big flood just gets washed out. And this stuff happens all the time. So material nature is very, very powerful. But we need to understand that don't be enamored by the material nature, because it's just a spark of Krishna's splendor. So the material nature is so amazing, and it's a spark of Krishna's splendor. How amazing is Krishna? An intelligent person draws that conclusion. They say, well, material nature, pretty impressive. But that's just a spark of the Creator. That's just nothing. That's just a tiny spark of His power. So how impressive is He? And that's what we want. We're not interested, we are, but our endeavor should be to not be attracted by this material nature. And that's what Parikat's saying here. I don't want to be attracted by this material nature, because it is attractive. I want to understand who is Krishna. Therefore he's asking these questions so that others also can understand the nature of the Supreme Person of God, how powerful He is, and how He's created this manifestation with so little effort. It's not like it's not like He has to work hard. It's just like I've built a house. I know what's involved. Anyone who wants to create something in this material world or build something in this material world has to expend so much effort. Krishna creates this whole material creation. How does He do it? He just looks. Pow! It happens. By His energy, He just glances, and then Shiva, he carries the glance to Rama Devi, and he impregnates the material Krishna's energy into her, and then the whole, the whole thing stirs into motion and comes about just by a glance. So very, very powerful. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. Any questions, comments at all? Yes, Saranya Mataji.
Just wondering,
there's a microphone coming apparently, so that we can all hear.
so just say things. You just mentioned Lord Shiva at the end of that. Carries the glance from Vishnu to Yogamaya, to
Ramadevi.
To Rama.
Ramadevi. Yeah.
Is that Sadashiva? Is that Sadashiva?
I don't know.
I guess it's the material world.
I don't know. Do you know? Sadashiva, yeah. Prabhu says Sadashiva.
That's not the material world.
No, that's prior to the manifestation of the material world.
That's just
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome.
very nice class.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just a comment that we made. The capacity of Sukadeva Swami is extraordinary. Because, you know, if you get asked one question, sometimes people ask you two questions in class, and you answer the first one, and you have to say, what was your other question?
Yeah.
And the amount of questions that are being asked at the moment is just extraordinary that, you know, you
Yeah.
be able to answer them all.
And 7 days later,
That's insane.
yeah, 7 days later, you still got the essence of the questions. You know? And also like at the end of this chapter, that there's two really interesting points that come out. Is Parikshit Maharaj, he says to Shukadeva Goswami, because I'm experiencing this nectar dripping from your words, he's seeing the Bhagavatam as nectar, and it's just dripping from your speech. I don't feel any exhaustion. And he's been going on for at least, I'd say at least a day by now. He's fasting, he's been fasting for a while. He's not experiencing any exhaustion. And then also the Bhagavatam mentions that, I think it's Sutta Goswami is explaining, that because he was the king of the Pandavas, he was asking the right questions from the right person. Therefore, we're getting the Bhagavatam, because he was qualified to be asking the right questions from the right person, meaning Shukadeva Goswami. So when the disciple is qualified, and when the guru is qualified, then Krishna consciousness results. And that's what we're getting from the Bhagavatam. And as we see earlier on in this verse, in this chapter, it mentions that by studying the Bhagavatam, one can achieve the goal of life. So it's very, very important. This is not just an ordinary book, but I do encourage you to try to, if you do study the Bhagavatam, is to try to not just read it verse by verse, do that for sure, but also try, before I read a chapter, what I do is I'll read all the verses in the chapter, so I get the story of the chapter. Because it's very, very important to see the sequence of how things are going on. And you can start to see, okay, he's asking 21 questions here, but this is the rest of the Bhagavatam. This is what he's explaining the rest of the Bhagavatam. And how he started off with one question, then he starts off 6 questions, then 21 questions. And it's really, really very interesting to see how the whole thing expands. Prabhu.
In the creation, you see that there's it starts with Krishna. Then in this world, you're talking about Brahma, Shiva and Parvati, and they all have a relative role in creation. I don't know if you can give us a quick synopsis of their particular involvement in the creative process.
Yeah, I guess a little bit. In the Madhya Lila, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 20, we see, or actually chapters 20 to 24, Lord Chaitanya is explaining the process of devotional service to Sanatana Goswami. And at one point he describes 6 different types of avatars: Guna avatars, Lila avatars, Purusha avatars, Shaktavesh avatars, Lila avatars, and Yuga avatars. Yeah? So he does touch there a bit on the Guna avatars, which we often identify as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But Vishnu technically is not a Guna avatar, because he's not influenced by the modes of nature, whereas Brahma and Shiva are. And it's described how they're actually, when the Lord wants to come into contact with, because he can't come into contact with the material nature because of his transcendental position, but when he wants to come into contact with the material nature, he manifests as Shiva and Brahma. Then Brahma is a very, very powerful jiva. So powerful that he's able to, extraordinarily powerful actually, I don't think we can actually conceive of how powerful he is. It's just, you know, even you look at this whole material world and you think, wow, so powerful. That's nothing compared to Brahma. So he's just so insignificant compared to Krishna. You know, so like it's really good to study these kind of things, because the tendency is we do something which we think is wonderful and we get proud. We think, look how wonderful I am. But you know, if we can understand how insignificant we are, then we can start to understand this knowledge. But if we're thinking, I'm so great, I'm so wonderful, look at what I've done, you know, or what I know, or how I explain things, whatever, it's very difficult to understand. Pride is the thing that blocks knowledge. And this, Prabhupada mentions this in I think it's the 13th chapter of the Gita, in one of the purports there. Those verses start, there's a whole sequence of verses that says, amanitam adambitam, where he explains that, you know, without humility one cannot have knowledge. So that's the beginning of understanding, is we understand our position. So we see with Lord Brahma, he's a qualitative incarnation of the mode of passion. So passion indicates creation, doing things, building things, making things, stuff like that. So he's the secondary creator, which is also what's being asked about in the 4th chapter. He was asking about Shaga and Vishaga, the primary creator, which is Krishna, and then the secondary creator, which indicates Brahma, and the Prajapatis, Prajetas, the other Devatas. And so Brahma, he's the first progenitor. He's the one who, you know, from his body, this gives you an idea of how powerful he is, from his body expanded so many different living entities. You know, from his thumb, from his eyes, from between, you know, Lord Shiva came out from between his eyebrows, you know, from different parts of his body. I don't remember what was described in, I think it's the 2nd chapter, the 2nd canto, sorry, at some point. It mentions the 2nd canto? Yeah, describes how all these different jivas, or all these different living entities come out of Brahma. But still he's a jiva. But he's responsible for the creation of this material world, for taking the elements provided by Krishna, provided by the Lord, and manifesting all of this. And he does it mostly through his intelligence. But he was able to do that because he performed austerity for 100 years. He meditated upon the Lord and the instruction he received from the Lord. And then he was instructed this section of the Gita. Now Shiva, it's kind of interesting you asked about Shiva, because he's also one of the guna avatars. Brahma, generally speaking, he's a jiva. Sometimes he's when there's no qualified jiva to take on that role, then the Lord himself manifests as that guna avatar of Brahma. But that's not so common, but it does happen. But then Shiva, he's not a jiva, but he's not Krishna either. He's in between. And it's actually mentioned by some authorities that says there's 3 things that are almost impossible to understand. I can only remember 2 of them. One of them is Shiva Tattva, and the other one is Guru Tattva. I can't remember the 3rd one. Is it Shakti Tattva? No, it's not Shakti Tattva. Anyhow, there's 3 things that you can't understand really. So Lord Shiva's position is very, very extraordinary, because he's not a jiva, but he's not quite Krishna. It mentions in the Brahma Smritis, Shiram yata didibhikara vishesha yoga sanjayate hitata pritagashti hito yashambhutam apatita samapaitika yad govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. So just as, you know, we take milk and you add an acid or a culture, you can transform it into yogurt. Yogurt is nothing but milk, but you can't make milk out of yogurt. Anyone who's a cook here knows you can't do it. It's not possible. So in the same way, Lord Shiva is a transformation of Vishnu. He's nothing but Vishnu, but he's not Vishnu. Chinta Beta Beta Tattva. He's simultaneously one and different. But he has a specific function, and his function is to destroy the material world. So when it's time for the creation to be wound up, then he performs the Tandava Nritya, this particular dance he does, which just winds up the whole material creation. Now, he's one of the Guna avatars. The Guna avatars are expansions of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. Usually, most of the incarnations of the Lord that come into this world are expansions from Chiradakshaya Vishnu. They enter through Chiradakshaya Vishnu. Whereas the living entities in this world, the Jivas, Brahma and Shiva, come from Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. And he's very, very powerful. And it's actually when the Lord wants to come in touch with Maya, with the material nature, then Shiva and Brahma manifest. And generally speaking, we understand that Shiva is in contact with Maya, but sometimes some particular manifestations of Shiva, because in each universe is a different Shiva. Sometimes, as in our universe, when they overcome that influence of Maya, then they become Mahabhagavat devotees. So this is the situation of the Shiva in our universe. He's actually a Mahabhagavat. Vaishnavanam Yata Shambhu, it's described how he is the greatest of Vaishnavas also, because he's surpassed this influence of Maya. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I mean, you could give seminars on Lord Shiva and Brahma. They're extraordinary characters.
I understand that in that creative process in the universe, those three personalities, Brahma, Shiva and Parvati, they're all involved. I was trying to understand the relative role in that creative process.
Well, like I was saying, is Brahma, he's involved in the secondary creation. And so he takes the pradhan, the elements that are provided by the Lord, and then manifests the universe from that. That's his role. Whereas Shiva, in the primordial Shiva, the form of the primordial Shiva, he carries the glance from Vishnu to Ramadevi. Not Rama, but Rama. It's different, the long A at the end, not the first A. And impregnates her. He's just the one who carries the glance. So the Lord doesn't directly contact material nature. So that's material nature. So that's the role he plays as the primordial, or as Prabhu was saying, Sadashiva. But then in the universe, actually in the material universe, his role is more when it comes to the point of destruction. That's where he steps in.
It seems like Maya, she finesses the material entities.
Yeah.
The details.
Well, I think that there's a lot of overlap in the roles that different personalities play. It seems to me there's a lot of overlap, because we hear that Brahma is the engineer, but then we hear Durga Devi is material nature, and we hear Shiva is doing various things. So it seems like there's some degree of overlap, and they have different functions to play. But I'm not deeply learned in this. I mean, maybe you can ask from my Swami when he's back. I think he would know much more than I. He's much more learned and well-read than I am. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.